But in reality, what would have more than likely happened is those followers of Jesus would have dressed like Jesus. They would have done their hair like Jesus. They would have walked like Jesus. They would have only ate the meals that Jesus ate in the way that he ate them. When you follow a rabbi, you take that person and you follow them in every detail you possibly can. Hey, everybody, welcome to the 4th episode of the Sinless podcast series. I'm James Rock, and this is my friend Justin, and we are in the beautiful Trout Lake Camps podcast studio, and we're here to talk about Sinless. This episode is going to be about why, then we'll do an episode on how, and then we'll do an episode that's a bit more of a discussion. We're going to have another person that we're going to bring in for that one, John Owen, although he wrote this book in 1656, so we'll see how that goes. But I just want to start out by saying, hey, congratulations on getting through your first week. I know writing things down on a little board and check marks and all that kind of stuff is kind of weird. My hope is you're learning about a couple things. I know in my experience, one of the first things that I was kind of surprised by in checking off the sins in a day, and again, I've got the 7 deadly sins, a couple of the 10 Commandments, and then a couple just kind of throw on speeding and doom scrolling and stuff like that. But one of the things I was kind of surprised of is I sinned a little less than I thought, but some of the sins that I sinned so much more than I thought. It reminded me of back in the day at Trout Lake Camps, we were dealing with sarcasm, and it's something we actually still deal with. We just had a staff meeting talking about it the other day, that we tend to be sarcastic. And when you're around 1st, 2nd, and 3rd graders, 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, sarcasm doesn't hit. We did this thing where we had a quarter jar for all of our staff that wanted to play along, and most of them did. And when you were sarcastic, you had to put a quarter in the quarter jar. And I thought for sure the program director at the time, I was the on-site director, the program director at the time would be so bad at this game, and he would put so many quarters in, but it wasn't even close. I was so much more sarcastic than him when I actually was keeping count and putting a quarter in the jar, which eventually went towards scholarships for camp and all sorts of stuff like that. But the deal is, until you actually measure things you don't know, and again, if I was talking to you about trying to set up a New Year's Eve resolution, I'd say only pick 1 or 2. Don't pick 12. It just so happens in the sinless attempt that I'm trying to do, I've picked 12 sins, which kind of connect other sins, and we'll get in the details there eventually. But again, right away, my first week, I was like, wow, this scoring is not what I thought it was. I was surprised by again, just the results of it. I wonder if you were too, and if you are, please put comments in the comments here and tell us, hey, this is what I was surprised for. This is what caught me off guard that first week of doing Sinless. And so, just a reminder, we're talking about Romans 8:13, and I'm going to use Owen's version again, that old school Bible. If by the Spirit ye mortify the sins of the body, ye shall live. So if by the Spirit you kill sin, you're going to find life. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to do anything else but to try to figure out, man, if I concentrate on sinning less as a follower of Jesus, what will that result be? And so I want to do a big analogy for you, but I got to step back a little bit. Several years ago, at Trout Lake Camps, we have about 500 campers that can come in a summer week, but we're a year-round ministry where we can have on a weekend 300-400 campers in the fall, a little bit less in the winter. We've got 40-some year-round staff, and in that 40-some year-round staff, 10 of them are interns, either taking a gap year or just trying to figure out where they want to go and is their careers, if they're interested in ministry, all sorts of stuff like that. And that goes way back to my early days here at Trout, back in the 1900s when we only had one intern, then two, then three. Now we've got 10. And we were noticing other camps across the country were doing a pretty cool thing. They were taking their intern groups, and as part of that internship experience, they were putting them in planes and going over to Turkey, Greece to do a Footprints of Paul, or going to Israel to do a Footprints of Jesus, and go and tour those countries and see exactly where it was that Jesus stood on the Mount of Olives and all that kind of crazy stuff. And it's just an unbelievable trip, and it's an amazing gift that we're able to give our interns at Trout. And another step back, the camp that I worked for before I came to Trout, there was a guy that I worked there. His name's John, and he actually did his seminary in Israel at Jerusalem University College, and got a degree in at those biblical sites, and amazing stuff. And he ended up being the tour guide that our camp uses to go over to Israel. And so John does this so much better than me, but I'm gonna try to help you through it, and it's going to connect to these rocks. Essentially, what happens is when you go to Jerusalem College University, I always say it wrong, they bring in rabbis to teach those students about what it was like to be a follower of Jesus, and what it's like to follow a rabbi. And real life rabbis will come and teach at that school and teach these guys and go out on biblical sites and show them things and all sorts of stuff like that. And it's such an insight to who Jesus was when you realize that he was a rabbi, he was a teacher. And although he picked up his band differently than most, more than likely, you've got Peter, who's the older guy who'd been skipped over by the other rabbis, that becomes his number two guy. And then you've got all the other disciples who are more than likely teenagers, college-age kids, young kids, who haven't figured out things that were also probably passed over by the other rabbis, and Jesus goes and collects this merry band. And one of the things that happens is when you see these pictures of the disciples, they're always wearing different clothes, they're always kind of different ages, they're super old and all this kind of stuff. But in reality, what would have more than likely happened is those followers of Jesus would have dressed like Jesus. They would have done their hair like Jesus. They would have walked like Jesus. They would have only ate the meals that Jesus ate in the way that he ate them. When you follow a rabbi, you take that person and you follow them in every detail you possibly can. So if Jesus had a beard, every one of them would have had a beard that looked as close to that as possible. If you put a curl in his hair today, you can see in rabbis today, they'll put a curl in their hair right here, and then all their followers will follow that curl here. It's an amazing thing. But the reason why I bring it up is this mindset of, in following Jesus, the disciples would have been able to try to follow every single thing that he did. One of the reasons why this whole idea of sinless exists is, was it possible for one of those rabbis to have gone a day without sinning like the rabbi that they're perfectly copying? And I'm sure we'll talk about that one more, because I've read a lot about the disciples. I'm a little concerned that maybe they never did. But man, wouldn't it have been amazing had they, in trying to follow Jesus exactly what he's doing every day, to be able to mirror him so perfectly that they would be able to mirror his lack of sin on that day. It just kind of blows my mind a little bit. But that's where I'm getting to this story. So one of the rabbis at that Jerusalem College University brought John and his classmates out, and basically you learned to follow that rabbi and exactly what he was doing. And they did it in kind of a funny way. The rabbi would actually walk through bushes that had thorns on them, and you would get poked. And the rabbi would kind of walk through there and wait for the students to follow his path. And he'd walk through and then walk through again, and a couple would kind of follow him and go, okay, I'm following the rabbi, and I'm getting, prickers on my legs. And then he'd walk through again, and then you'd wait for the other people in the class to figure out, hey, I need to follow this rabbi and exactly what he's doing. And there's always that one or two stragglers, right, that aren't paying any attention. Meanwhile, everybody's getting these pokers into their legs, walking through these bushes, trying to follow this rabbi. And finally, the last follower figures out what's going on and goes, oh, I got to follow him through. Then the rabbi, once he gets the whole crew doing it, stops and goes on to the next teaching, right? So that's kind of how the rabbis would teach. And again, you can hear kind of the parables in that mindset with what Jesus did and how he taught and how he went around and how he used his surroundings to teach. But again, let me pull back. So there's a pretty famous rabbi teaching in which the rabbi comes out and he picks up a stone, and he grabs that stone and he looks at it, and then he puts his back in his pocket, and then he kind of continues to walk around and go out throughout his day, and then he picks up that stone again and looks at it. And then finally, the disciples that are following him will hopefully eventually go and find a stone. And again, not just any stone, but they want a stone that looks exactly like this white one that he picked up, as close as they can find. And when the rabbi pulls it out of his pocket to look at it, they pull it out of their pocket to look at it and try to figure out what's going on. Then eventually, once they've all gotten that stone, he goes and he finds a black stone, and he picks it up, and he'll take both of them and he'll look down at them, and then he'll put them in his pocket, and then he'll fumble around with them again, and then he'll put them in his pocket, and then hours could go by, minutes could go by. Suddenly he picks them up again, and then suddenly the followers, his disciples, are all doing the same, but they're looking at the rocks and no idea why, no idea what's going on, until one of them bravely, again in Jesus' time, probably Peter, the oldest one, but not always, but one of them bravely would finally look at the rabbi and say, Rabbi, what's with the rocks? Why are we looking at these? And the rabbi stops and he addresses the whole group. And he tells the group that the white rock represents him making the correct decision, doing the thing that he should be doing, and the black rock represents him making the wrong decision, doing the thing that he shouldn't be doing. And the rabbi says his whole life, every moment, day to day, is a battle between choosing the thing that he should be doing and the thing that he shouldn't be doing. And so he puts the rocks into his pocket and brings them up, and he's constantly considering that battle that's going on in his walk in order to follow God in a way that he feels God is calling him to be followed. Picking the right decision or picking the wrong decision, but the rocks represent this understanding that the rabbi knows that every moment of every day is a battle between those two decisions. And so he sticks them back in his pocket, and as the trainings go on, as the days go on, as the years go on, he pulls them out and looks at them over and over and over again and tries to figure out, is he going to follow the right path or the wrong path? And that's essentially what sinless is about. How do we sin less? How do we choose that right path? How do we recognize the bad path and decide, no, I'm going to do what God wants me to do? Now, these two rocks were the first two rocks that I ever grabbed in Israel to follow John's example of that rabbi's example of having these two rocks. But these two rocks I picked in my front yard here at home and said, hey, I'm going to walk around until I find a black and a white rock. These rocks I purchased from Hobby Lobby, which is pretty easily done. Now, the funny part is, for whatever reason, the Hobby Lobby rocks, they're slick, and I find I play with them more because of the slickness of them and the feel of them. And so what my suggestion is to you on today's podcast is, when it comes to how we choose to sin less and to become as sinless as we can, I highly suggest you find a black rock and a white rock and you put them in your pocket. Doesn't matter where they came from. Doesn't matter how you got got them, doesn't matter how you paid for them, doesn't matter how big or small they are, but find rocks that you find yourself constantly kind of fidgeting with, right? And as you're fidgeting with these rocks, be thinking about these choices that you're making every day. And again, I'll go back to it. Romans 8:13, if by the Spirit ye mortify the deeds of the body, ye shall live. So if we can kill the drawings of this black wrong rock and lean towards the calling out of the white rock and the right decisions, we find peace, we find life. Maybe these two rocks will help you as much as they've helped me. Thanks.